Hi guys, in today's lesson we're going to look at unit testing. Unit tests are the frontline troops of regression testing, usually run by developers whilst actually working on the code. With TDD of course, unit tests for a particular feature will be written before the feature itself is developed, but only for the current feature itself. The remaining suite of unit tests for features that have already been written can be run once the new feature has been developed to check that the new feature hasn't broken any of the existing features. And for bug fixing, unit tests are usually written after the bug has been fixed. If the bug has appeared previously, there may be a unit test for it, but if not, the unit test may be written once the bug has been fixed, or during the bug fixing. But regardless of the exact nature of the code that has been added, unit testing is undoubtedly the first step of the test cycle. So let's add some unit tests and run them. I've got a very simple application that I've put together for the purpose of running tests against. It's just a simple math app with methods to add, subtract, divide, multiply, and sum a series of numbers. Nothing crazy, but we can see how easy it is to run tests against a JavaScript app. You should download the accompanying code for this course, unpack it somewhere convenient. Inside it, you'll find a folder called Regression Testing Essentials, and inside that you'll find a folder called Test App. So there's a couple of directories here already. There's a tests folder, which itself contains a folder called spec. There's also a lib folder, which is currently empty, and a JS folder, which is where the application logic resides. We'll use Jasmine as the test framework. It's powerful and easy to use and should suit our needs perfectly. We could also use QUnit, but as we're testing a plain vanilla JavaScript app, it seems pointless bringing jQuery into the equation. We can get a copy of Jasmine from GitHub. So the documentation is at this address here. It's very good documentation. I'd advise you to read through it at some point when you have time. But if we go all the way down to the bottom, we should find the downloads area. Here's the test results, by the way. This is what the default test runner looks like. So downloads, we want the standalone release. And 1.3.0 is the current version. So in the download, we'll get a file called Spec Runner, which is what runs the tests. And there are also some example specs and some test code to test. We don't need any of that except for the Spec Runner page. So we want to put this in the tests folder. And we also want the Jasmine -1.3.0 folder. So we'll just copy that as well. We'll put this in our lib folder. Okay, so those are the files we need. Now we need to update the Spec Runner page. So what we want to do first of all is just fix some of the paths in here. So as we're inside the tests folder, we want to move up a level and then look in lib. We can do that for the CSS and for the script files. So we've only got one source. And this is in ... /JS, and it's called app.js. And we'll create a spec in just a moment. We'll only have one of them, so we can get rid of one of these scripts. So in the spec folder, we want to add a new script file. And we'll give this the same name as the file that's being tested, so that's app.js. And we'll just fix the spec path here. Okay, great. So Spec Runner is now configured. Let's write some tests. Jasmine tests are organized into test suites, and that is done using the describe method. This method takes a string description as the first argument and a function as the second argument. With the first argument, the string is describing the test suite. So let's add that now. So we start with describe, and we're testing the test app. Inside this describe, we can add other describes so that we can organize our tests according to the part of the application that's being tested. So let's add another one now. So this time we're going to describe one of the actual methods. So we'll describe the add method. So once again, we add a function as the second argument. So now inside this function, we can add these specs that we're going to use to test the add method. So this is done using the it method, which also takes a string as the first argument and a function as the second argument. This time the string should describe what we're actually testing. So the spec should make an assertion about the add method. So we'll say it should accept, we'll spell it correctly, only 2 arguments. And we add a function as the second argument to this method once again. And what we also want to do is just invoke an instance of our application so that we can use it in our tests. We'll do that up at the top here. So we're just calling our application's constructor and creating a new instance of the app. So back to our test now. So inside the function passed to the it method, we can add any required test code as well as our expectations. So the expectations are added using the expect method, and we can combine them with a matcher to actually make an assertion. So we're testing the add method, and we're testing that the add method should only accept 2 arguments. So when the method does accept 2 arguments, and those arguments are in the required format, the application will return the sum of those 2 numbers. So numbers in JavaScript, except for 0, are generally truthy. So we can pass in 2 numbers and then use a matcher that tests whether the response is truthy or not. So we'll use the add method, we'll pass in 2 numbers, and we would expect that to be truthy. And when we don't pass in the right number of arguments, the response will be false, so we can test that as well. So we would expect calling the add method with only 1 argument to be falsy. So this is another matcher that matches against false this time instead of true. And let's just test that when we pass in more than the expected number of arguments, we also get a falsy response. Great, okay, so that's our first spec written. So let's check whether the tests pass. We can do that by opening up the Spec Runner page. And it looks like I've spelt the to be falsy method incorrectly. I have. So this is what a failing spec looks like, by the way. And let's just refresh the page. And now the spec is passing. So let's just take a moment to take a look at the strings that we've added. So one thing about the unit tests is that the descriptions of them should read like a sentence. So the add method should accept only 2 arguments. That makes perfect sense, and that is a good unit test description. So let's go back now and add another spec. So this time we can test that the method accepts only numerical arguments. So let's add another it method. So it should accept only numerical arguments. So we use the expect method once again. So we'll pass in the correct number of arguments for these tests so that we can be sure that we're testing the correct thing. So we'll try passing in a string and a number, and we would expect that not to work, so the response would be falsy. I'll spell falsy correctly this time. And let's just try adding some different things and just checking that the responses are falsy each time. So let's try passing in an array. Let's add some items to that array. So that would still be falsy. And let's just try it with an object this time. And that should be falsy also. And now let's just pass in, looks like I'm missing a bracket there. Let's just pass in the correct arguments and just again check that that's truthy. We have already kind of checked this. In fact, we can take the same bit of code. So let's go back to the Spec Runner now and just check that our new set of tests are also passing. And they are, which is good. So lastly, we should probably test that the add method actually adds the numbers together correctly as it should do. And again, we can use another it for this. So it should accept two numbers and return the sum of them. So we've used the to be truthy and to be falsy matches so far. For this test, we can use the to equal matcher instead. So we'll use the expect method again, and we'll pass in our two numbers, and we would expect the response to equal 2. And let's just try adding a few different types of numbers. So if we pass in -1 and -1, we would expect the response to equal -2. And let's just try a slightly bigger number. And this time we would expect the response to equal 1000. Okay, great. So let's go back to the Spec Runner now. And our tests are still passing. That's good. So the rest of the methods in our app can be tested in exactly the same way. So let's just do this quickly. So as well as the add method, our code also has a subtract method. And it should work in pretty much the same way. So it should only accept 2 arguments. And they should be numerical arguments once again. And it should accept the 2 numbers and return the difference between them. So if we pass in 1 and 1, we would expect the response to equal 0. And let's just correct these. Obviously, if we subtract 1 from 1, we're going to be left with 0, which is correct, but 0 in JavaScript is falsy. So this test will fail. Let's just change that so that it subtracts 1 from 2, and the difference of course will be 1, and that is truthy. So we'll do the same thing down here as well, and then back in the last method now. So if we subtract -1 from -2, then we're expecting -1 this time. And let's just subtract 500 from 1000, and that should give us 500. And let's just make sure we're using the correct method. Great. Okay, so let's go back to the Spec Runner again. Just make sure everything's working as it should. So we also have a multiply method. Multiply method, this should also accept only 2 arguments. So all of these methods work in very similar ways, so it's quite easy to quickly build up an extensive test suite as we're doing now. So this time it should accept 2 numbers and multiply the first number by the second number. Let's just make sure this description is as good as it could be. Remember, it should read well. So it should accept 2 numbers and return the first number multiplied by the second number. So that sounds right. So let's see, 1 times 1 is 1. Let's try 10 times 5, that should equal 50. And minus 2 multiplied by minus 1 should be minus 2. And let's try Spec Runner. We've got a fail now. Expect minus 2, minus 1. And of course, minus 2 multiplied by minus 1 should equal 2. Let's try that again. Wonderful. So we just have the divide method now. So we'll just quickly update these. So it still should only accept 2 arguments. And those arguments should be numerical. And it should accept 2 numbers and return the first number divided by the second number. So 1 divided by 1 is 1, minus 2 divided by minus 1 is minus 2, and 10 divided by 5 is 2. Let's try that. So hang on. Testing the wrong method now. Yay. Okay, so these are our simple methods. Our application that we're testing does also have a sum method, and the tests for this is going to differ from these other tests as well. So let's just add a basic suite for this method as well. This time we're describing the sum method. And this time it should accept an array as an argument. So we would expect that app.sum, passing in an array, the response would be truthy. So we're back to the truthy and falsy matches at this point, missing a bracket. And let's just make sure that only arrays are accepted. And this time it should be falsy again. Okay, so what else should it do? So it should accept an array of numbers and return the sum of them, ignoring any non-numerical array items. So slightly longer description this time, but it's better to have a long description that describes the test well than to have a short description that leaves you wondering what it is that's actually being tested. So, okay. So we would expect that if we invoke the sum method and pass it an array of numbers, it should equal 3. And let's just try passing in arrays with other types in there just to make sure that they get ignored. This should still equal 3. And let's just try passing in some zeros as well. Okay, let's go back to the test runner one more time. And I've spelled falsy wrong again. I can't believe there are so many different ways to get this wrong. And our tests are now passing. So it's hardly test-driven development because we've added the tests after the app itself. However, once the tests have been written and run once, they then become regression tests when rerun in the future. So if we go and make a change to one of the methods, let's say we're working on the application and we accidentally break the add method. When we go back and run the tests, we'll see that one of the tests is failing and oops, we've made a mistake. Let's just fix that. And now our tests are passing again. So that is the point of unit testing. So in this lesson we looked at writing and running unit tests with the excellent Jasmine test framework and saw that these are perhaps the most basic form of regression testing and should almost certainly be carried out very early in the test lifecycle of application development, whether on the client side, server side, or both. We also saw how quickly tests can build up. We're working with a very tiny, very simple app here, and already we have 14 specs. Luckily, these are usually very close to the application code being tested and are fairly quick and cheap to run. In the next lesson, we'll look at automating these unit tests. Thanks for watching.